Welcome to week 2. Hopefully this video will serve as a little bit of an introduction to educational research and build off your reading in week 1. So the first thing I want to do is actually take a step back into 583 and 584, where I know with Matt you worked on the design thinking approach, and you may have looked at this quote in particular. Design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So that came out of the original sort of IDEO design thinking work, which has been adapted to work in education. And so IDEO sort of spun that off and says that design thinking for educators is a creative process that helps you design meaningful solutions in the classroom, at your school, and in your community. And you likely saw this graphic with Matt in terms of what does design thinking look like, as sort of a little graphic. And what I wanted to do is talk about the fact that there's a really explicit reason that we have that content come first in our curriculum for the master's program, because I think it grounds you in the approach we want to take to research. And I wanted to make that connection for folks. So again, this is hopefully sort of reminiscent of the work you did in 583 and 584 in terms of what are these different stages of design thinking, and the fact that it's circular. It's not a process that we sort of say, aha, it's all done, we've figured it out, but rather that we continue to iterate and adapt these cycles. And so you may have seen this as well from the IDEO for education materials in terms of these stages, and I wanted then to translate that into what I hope you bring to the idea of research. And research, according to Creswell, the author of the textbook, is a process of steps used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of a topic or an issue. And so what I've done is tried to think about how do we map on the sort of research process that Creswell suggests onto the design thinking process. And so again, it starts with what's this problem of practice and how are we going to empathize with all the stakeholders that might be involved then. And then we're going to need to think about defining what's our research question. What is it that we want to clearly ask and learn? And then when we're ideating in educational research, we also want to look at what do we already know about the topic? What have other people already found, and how can we avoid recreating the wheel? And then prototyping, and what can we try? What data do we need? And then finally testing. What did we find? What does it mean? And what can we do now? And so Creswell suggests 6 steps in his framework, and we're going to kind of work through those steps in a couple of different methodological frameworks. And so you can kind of see how this maps between the design thinking schematic and then also Creswell's steps. So hopefully that helps to kind of frame research in the light of a process of investigating a question, a problem of practice that you want to shed some light on. And this year-long sequence will help with some of that. And so what that means in terms of the next year that we work together is that there's 3 courses. 582 is the summer course, 586 is the fall course, and 587 will be the spring of 18 course. And this summer, the goal is to really identify the research problem. And then we'll start reviewing the literature. You'll work into that in the fall as well, along with specifying a purpose for your research. And then in 586 and 587, you'll be collecting the data. And then in 587, analyzing and interpreting the data, and then also reporting and evaluating in the spring with 587. So one thing I wanted to do is kind of just step back for a second and look big picture, and that is that it's really important to realize when you approach research that people come at it with a paradigm or a worldview about what it means to know. And so you have to really be aware of those paradigms as you are approaching this. And so there's positivism on the one side and sort of over to pragmatic They're not a perfect spectrum, but sort of different ways of knowing. And what that means is that for the positivists, this is really the foundation of the scientific method. And there's this expectation that reality exists and that we can know it. This is experimental research. It's typically quantitative research. And it tends to be, there's a hypothesis that we're going to test. We will decide if we can dismiss the null hypothesis. And that's really one approach to what it means to know. On the other hand is constructivism, and pragmatism is sort of an extension of that. And constructivism suggests very much a different thing, is that reality is socially constructed. It's going to be impacted by our background and our narrative stories. And this comes much more in line with the qualitative approach. And I think it's really important to recognize these paradigms, not as something that you have to memorize, but to realize that your own approach is going to be driven by your bias about what it means to know. And as you're thinking about designing a study, you're going to need to not only honor that with regards to the kind of question you want to ask, but with the methodology that's going to fit for you and your approach, and also honors the needs of the organization that you work in. And so I think that it's just important to help frame that this is bigger than just a sort of algorithm and a process, but it goes back to what we believe to be true. So what that lends to is that there are a series of research designs, and again, these sort of span that paradigm of what it means to know. And at the top are sort of the three major methodologies: quantitative, qualitative, and then combined. You'll also see in the literature the term mixed methods for this combined. And these can be further broken down into types of research. And you saw some of this, you saw this graphic in chapter 1 to hopefully help you understand what's the spectrum of ways I could approach a problem of practice. So hopefully you were able to take some notes. This was the graphic organizer I'd given you. Again, nothing I need to collect. I just find it helpful for sort of grounding me in both the theory and then with the two sample studies, sort of helpful to play these ideas out. You will have access to these slides so that you don't need to copy this all down now, but this is sort of my take on these different approaches to research, and you can use these to kind of check what you found. But quantitative research is based in numbers and is also based in that positivist paradigm. And it's really measuring a relationship between variables, and you're looking for a very large sample. You're looking to avoid the sort of boundaries of a context, and typically you're looking at experimental, survey, intervention, or ex post facto, which is data that you analyze after it's been collected. Strengths and limitations to all methods in research, but hopefully you're starting to get a sense and get comfortable with, when we talk about quantitative research, what that domain encompasses. Likewise, you've got some introduction now to qualitative research, which definitely sort of falls at the other end of the spectrum, and it is typically grounded in language and document analysis, and is usually a much smaller sample size, and is much more looking to capture the participant perspective, and so that means that it's typically pretty context bound, and that what you find in your one rural school may not work in inner city Los Angeles. But if your goal is to solve a problem in your rural local school, then sometimes that approach really works. So again, strengths and limitations to this method as with the other. So hopefully you were able to work through the two example studies, the quantitative study and the qualitative study. Again, I would encourage you to sort of make use of documenting what are the terms you're not comfortable with yet, and what do you notice in those studies that reflects those methodologies, and then also reflects those paradigms, and what questions does it raise for you. And then in chapter 2, oops, I'm sorry. In chapter 2, hopefully you got the sense of what's this process that I'm going to go through here to try and identify my research problem. And we're going to spend a lot of time in 582 trying to really help you hone in on that research problem that you want to spend the year investigating, because it's really worth that time up front. And there's sort of these different elements that go into it. We're going to skip chapter 3 right now. We're going to come back to it for our first face-to-face because it has to do with reviewing the literature. I find it works better in a face-to-face setting. So for this week, you're going to be launching into chapters 4 and 5, and what I'll be asking you to do is starting to play with some purpose statements around what do you think you might want to research? And that's twofold. It's one, for me to see that you're gaining fluency with the difference between quantitative and qualitative. And then on the other hand, it is also to help you begin to articulate what's this thing that I'm trying to research. And this is the most challenging thing I find folks in 582 struggle with. I talk with other groups a lot about peeling the onion, and the fact that sometimes what you think you want to research is actually just the very outside of the onion, and we need to spend some time peeling back. What is it? What's the core of the issue? And for instance, you might be thinking about this. What happens if we collapse math and science classes and have a STEM class? But that really could be about highly qualified teachers. It could be about your belief in integrating math and science skills. It could be about the impact of policy and a school board member who's an engineer on educational practice. It could be about the role of technology in education. It could be about the impact of an annual internship in the move to PBE that you really want to investigate. It could be about following the money trail in education and the fact that grant money is tied to STEM approaches. It could be about the tech director having, a bias in this work. It could be about the impact of local perception and parent involvement. And so I think one of the things that I really try and have folks work on in 582 is really trying to unpack those things and figure out what is it that I am most interested in and that I feel like I can leverage for positive change for kids. Remember, that's got to be the goal that we're always shooting for. And then in chapter 5, you're going to work more into quantitative research. And for some of you that come out of a math science background, this is going to feel a lot more comfortable than for some of you that don't come out of that background. But again, keep in mind that this is our first interaction with what quantitative research is, what the different approach to reliability and validity are, what the different types of instruments are. This will continue to be information that we unpack as we go through the class and even into the fall. So journal number 2, the full instructions are on the week schedule, but I do want you to go back and look at some past students' research papers and just pick one and just sort of scan it and use it to help you generate questions about this next year of your life and the process. And then I'm going to have you work with some potential topics for what it is that you might want to research during this year, and you're going to combine a personal narrative with a quantitative statement of the problem for your first topic and research question, and then for your second topic, you're going to do the personal narrative and a qualitative statement of the problem and research question. And again, these are very much drafts. You are not committing yourself here. It's to gain fluency with these new terms, and then also to just start to unpack what it is you're interested in. And then there's just 2 other questions there. How did you decide which to do quantitative, which to do qualitative? And how's that connected to the reading? And then is there a question or connection you have to the content of the reading? So look forward to seeing your work and also to engaging with you in the Adobe Connect session to kind of unpack some of this information.